London has a way of making a street feel like a stage set when the weather decides to be dramatic about it. Baker Street, especially, doesn't just get wet, it gets cinematic. The rain beads on the black railings, turns the pavement into a mirror, and makes every taxi light look like a warning. I wasn't there for the museum, not the official one with the souvenir deerstalkers and the queue of tourists who want proof they stood near a fictional door. I was there for the smaller door, the one you'd miss if you were walking too fast and trusting the bright things. A brass plaque the size of a postcard, polished too often, read, "Hargreaves and Sons, Detective Antiques, Authentic Relics." Authentic, in London, is a word that earns its living by lying. Inside, it smelled like dust and old leather and something sweet like pipe tobacco that had given up. The shop was narrow, shelves crowding in like shoulders on a rush-hour platform. Gas lamp-style bulbs glowed above glass cases. Somewhere, a record player murmured a violin piece that sounded too sad to be background. Behind the counter stood a man who looked like he'd practiced looking trustworthy. 40s, sharp cheekbones, hair combed back with just enough rebellion to signal charm, a waistcoat that said he'd read about working-class grit in a book. His smile was immediate, professional, and slightly bored. "Afternoon," he said. "Looking for a piece of the legend?"
"I'm looking for a piece of the truth," I replied, because I had no idea how to enter a room like this without sounding like I was auditioning for it. His smile widened, as if I'd given him a gift. "Then you've come to the right place." I'd been a forensic archivist for the Met's historical collection. Old case files, old evidence, old mistakes. When you spend your days cataloging the past, you learn how it tries to crawl into the present. And lately, the past had been doing more than crawling. It had been showing up on eBay. My name is Mara Ellison, and I'd been asked to quietly assess a rumor. Someone near Baker Street was moving detective relics with suspicious confidence. Items were appearing in private collections with fake paperwork, fake provenance, and very real price tags. Hargreaves watched me look around, and he did it the way a tailor watches someone try on a suit, evaluating what I could afford, what I wanted to believe, and how long I'd pretend I didn't. He opened his arms slightly, as if presenting a gallery. "We specialize in the golden age," he said. "Detective culture, police history, a bit of theater with a bit of fact. A bit of fraud with a bit of polish," I said. That made him laugh, a warm sound, well-timed. "You've got the right instincts," he said. "I always tell customers, if it feels too perfect, it probably came from a factory in 2018. I drifted to the nearest case, a magnifying glass with a bone handle, a pipe that had never seen fire.
A notebook with pages too clean to be old. Tokens that wanted my money more than they wanted history. Then I saw it. Not because it was flashy, because it wasn't. At the bottom of the central case sat a small object, half hidden by a velvet stand. A metal cylinder, dull brass, no decorative flourish. It looked like a tool, not a souvenir. The sort of thing you'd lose in a drawer and only notice when you needed it. I leaned closer. A pocket loop, a collapsible magnifier, the kind jewelers used, and sometimes detectives did too, back when a close look could mean the difference between a suspect and a scapegoat. The brass had micro scratches, honest wear. The hinge was slightly loose. It didn't scream antique. It whispered used. Hargreaves noticed my pause. "Ah," he said softly, like a priest recognizing reverence. "You've got an eye." "What's the story?" I asked.
He reached into the case with careful fingers, no gloves, but a performance of delicacy. He placed it on the counter between us as if it could bite. "This," he said, "is the real thing." I turned it over. The underside had an engraving, faint, almost worn away. 3 letters and a number. CID 47. Criminal Russian dolls of bureaucracy. That wasn't Victorian theater. That was inventory. Hargreaves watched my face for the moment I'd either buy it or accuse him of treason against truth. "It's not for tourists," he added quickly. "It's for people who understand what they're holding." "And what am I holding?" I asked. He lowered his voice, leaning in. "A loop issued to a detective in the late 19th century, Scotland Yard, used in a real case. The paperwork is complicated." "Complicated is what people say when it's fake," I replied. He lifted his hands. "Or when it's the sort of item that should have stayed in an evidence locker and didn't." That landed in my chest like a cold coin. I opened it, peered through the glass. The lens was slightly cloudy, but not from age, from fingerprints, from hands. Something on the rim caught the light, a tiny dark stain near the hinge, brownish, old-looking, like rust. I'd seen enough evidence to know the difference between dirt and something that used to be alive. My throat tightened. "How much?" I asked. Hargreaves smiled, relieved. "For you, a fair price." He named a number that tried to be casual and failed. I didn't flinch, which surprised him. I had a budget, and I had a suspicion. As he wrote up the receipt, he asked, "What line of work are you in, if you don't mind?" "I keep records," I said. "Records of what?" I looked at the loop again, at that worn engraving and that tiny stain that wouldn't stop catching the light, of things people thought they'd gotten away with. His pen paused for a fraction. He recovered instantly, but I noticed. "Then," he said pleasantly, tearing off the receipt, "this will suit you beautifully." Outside, the rain thickened, tapping the window like impatient fingers. I slipped the loop into my coat pocket, feeling its weight against my ribs. It felt less like a purchase and more like a warning. Back in my flat near Angel, I set the loop on my kitchen table under the harsh light that never flatters anything. My place was small, like most London survival spaces, but it had one luxury: quiet. No shop music, no sales patter. Just the city's distant hum and the occasional siren, reminding you that reality was always moving. I took out my gloves, the proper nitrile ones I stole from my own workplace like a hypocrite, and handled the loop again. The stain on the rim wasn't dramatic. It wasn't enough to make the average buyer recoil, but it was exactly the sort of thing that made an evidence technician sit up straight. I photographed it from every angle. I measured it. I didn't scrape it. Not yet. I wanted my lab to do it, officially, with chain of custody paperwork so clean it could pass for a religion. But before I did any of that, I did what any Londoner does when they can't sleep. I went looking for patterns. I pulled up my notes on Hargreaves. Felix Hargreaves, according to the little internet that existed about him, was a heritage dealer with a talent for charm and a history of moving locations. He'd had a stall once in Camden Lock, then a small shop in Bloomsbury, then Baker Street, like he'd been orbiting the myth until he found a place where the name itself did half his marketing. His customers, judging by reviews, adored him. So knowledgeable, so friendly, felt like stepping into history. The negative reviews were all the same too. Paperwork seems off. Wouldn't provide full providence. Refund refused. The loop didn't fit the pattern. Fakes were usually overdone, too shiny, too perfect, too eager. This loop had the exhausted honesty of a tool that had lived in pockets and been thrown on desks and used under bad light to examine bad decisions. I tried to ignore the darker possibility forming in my mind. Evidence doesn't just walk into antique shops. At work the next morning, I brought it in under my coat like contraband. The historical collection office was tucked into a dull building you'd never associate with drama, which is where London keeps most of its drama, behind bland doors. I signed into the lab under a pretext. My colleague, Tasha, was on her third coffee and her first scandal of the day. "You look like you've got something," she said, eyes flicking to my coat pocket. "I bought a lie," I replied. "I'm trying to find out if it's a lie." She raised an eyebrow. "That's most days here." In our small forensic room, I placed the loop on the table. Tasha leaned in, and her expression changed the way mine had, that instant recalibration from curiosity to professional alarm. "Is that?" she started. "Looks like it," I said. We ran a preliminary test, non-destructive at first. A swab, gentle, like apologizing to the object. Then the rapid presumptive reagent. The color change was quiet, almost modest, but it was undeniable. Tasha sat back, exhaling through her teeth. "That's blood," she said.
Or something very committed to pretending it's blood. And if it's blood, I whispered, it shouldn't still be there. Not if it's Victorian, she agreed. Not like that. We sent the sample for proper analysis. We didn't talk about it in the corridor. We didn't email it to each other with a subject line like fun discovery. We treated it like what it was, a small stain with the potential to drag something ugly into the light. By afternoon, my phone rang with an internal number I didn't recognize. I picked up. "Ellison?" A man's voice, controlled, not unfriendly. "Mara Ellison? This is D.I. Samir Patel. Met police. Forensic results flagged your name. We need to speak." My stomach turned over, slow and heavy. "About what?" "About a DNA match," he said, "and an object that shouldn't exist in civilian hands." I stared at the loop through the lab glass, suddenly feeling like I'd brought a live wire into my kitchen. "What does it match?" I asked. There was a brief pause that told me the answer mattered. "It matches," he said. "A modern case." D. Samir Patel met me in a conference room that tried to look neutral and failed. Neutral rooms always carry the scent of secrets. Patel looked like someone who slept in bursts, early 30s, crisp shirt, tired eyes, the sort of calm that comes from having to stay calm when other people panic for a living. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He slid a printed report across the table. "Your sample," he said, tapping the page, "contains human blood. The degradation profile suggests it's not old." "How not old?" I asked. He held my gaze. "Not 19th century, not even mid-20th, closer to weeks than decades." A cold sensation crept up my spine. "So it's been handled recently." "It's been involved recently," Patel corrected. He pointed at the next line of the report, a DNA match percentage, a name, Sophie Lambert. The name meant nothing to me until Patel added, "French national, lives in London, reported missing 8 days ago." My mouth went dry. Missing as in her flat's untouched, her phone last pinged near Paddington, and her bank account hasn't been used since, Patel said. I stared at the name like it might rearrange itself into something less terrible. "How did her blood end up on a loop from Baker Street?" I asked. "That," Patel said, is what I'm hoping you can help us answer. I thought of Felix Hargreaves, his charming voice, the way his pen had paused when I said I kept records of what people got away with. A pause like a stumble.
You think the dealer is involved? I said. We think the loop is involved, Patel replied carefully. The dealer is a path we're walking down, but we need to know if the item itself is genuinely old or if it's a prop designed to distract. It's old, I said. The engraving isn't modern. The wear isn't faked. It feels used. Patel nodded. Then someone used an old object in a modern situation, which is either incredibly stupid or incredibly calculated. He leaned forward. Miss Ellison, how did you come across this item? I told him the truth. The shop, the case, the purchase. Patel's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened at the mention of the engraving. CID 47, he repeated. That could be anything, but it's interesting. He stood. We need you to walk me through the shop, not as a police officer, as someone who belongs there, someone who can spot what's wrong. I gave a humorless laugh. So you want me to go back? I want you to help us avoid scaring him off, Patel replied. Dealers like that don't panic unless you give them a reason. We'd rather watch him than chase him. I hesitated because my instincts were shouting that going back was how you became a headline. But another part of me, the one that spent years reading unsolved files, knew what happened when you ignored the thread. You ended up with a knot you couldn't untie. I'll go back, I said. Patel exhaled slightly, a controlled relief. Good. One more thing. He slid another photo across the table. Grainy CCTV still. A woman in a light coat, dark hair, turning her head as if she'd heard her name. The timestamp was 8 days ago. This is Sophie, he said. Last confirmed sighting, Paddington Concourse. I stared at her face, trying to imagine her blood drying on brass, trying not to. Patel's voice softened just slightly. If she's alive, this could lead us to her. If she's not. He didn't finish. London trains rattled outside the building, like the city clearing its throat. I picked up the loop again, feeling its weight like guilt. We go tonight? I asked. Patel nodded. Tonight. Baker Street after dark is a different animal. The tourists thin out, the streetlights glow harder, and the city feels like it's whispering to itself. The shop window was lit, but not brightly, a dim invitation, or a dim warning. Patel stayed across the street, pretending to examine his phone like every other person who had nowhere else to be. I went in alone. The bell chimed again, the same violin on the record player. Felix Hargreaves looked up, and his smile flickered, recognition with a hint of calculation. Back so soon, he said. The truth bite? Something like that, I replied, stepping into the familiar tightness of shelves and stories. He gestured toward the counter. Tell me you've fallen in love with your purchase. I'm thinking about buying something else, I said, because lies recognize lies, and you need to speak their language. His interest sharpened. Oh. I wandered as if browsing, letting my eyes skim. More pipes, more notebooks, more fake patina. But now, with the lab result in my head, everything felt contaminated. Every object could be a hiding place. I have a client, I said, lowering my voice slightly. Private collector, likes items with a darker edge, things that have been there. Felix's eyes were careful. Plenty of those, he said. Depends what you mean by been there. I stopped at the central case again, as if drawn by the mythology. The loop, I said. Was that your best piece? His smile held, but his posture tightened, a subtle defensive shift. One of my more unusual acquisitions, he said. Where did you get it? I asked casually.
He gave a small shrug. Estate sale. Family clearing out a box. London is full of boxes. Do you remember which family? I pressed. He laughed softly. You'd be surprised how many people don't want their names attached to these sorts of things. It's not always legal. I leaned in, meeting his eyes. You said the paperwork was complicated. What did you mean? He held my gaze a beat too long, then glanced past me toward the shop door, as if checking whether we were alone enough for honesty. I mean, he said quietly, that the city has its own way of losing things. Evidence gets misplaced, files disappear, and sometimes what vanishes from official hands resurfaces in private ones. My skin prickled. So you knew it was evidence? I said. He lifted a finger. I knew it looked like it, and I knew that was valuable. Is it still valuable? I asked. He frowned slightly. Why wouldn't it be? I pulled my phone from my pocket, not the report, just a photo, a close-up of the loop's hinge, the tiny stain. I held it up. What do you think that is? I asked. Felix's eyes flicked to the screen, and for the first time his composure cracked. Not dramatically, just a small, involuntary tightening around his mouth. He recovered quickly. Old grime, he said. Oxidation. Some people like the look. It's blood, I said softly. And it's not old. The shop felt suddenly smaller, as if the shelves had inched closer. Felix stared at me, then forced a laugh that didn't fit. Are you trying to frighten me, miss? Ellison, I said. He nodded, repeating it like he was storing it. Miss Ellison, you bought a relic. Relics are messy. You sold it to me, I replied. Do you want to explain how a missing woman's blood ends up on your estate sale relic? That did it. The color drained from his face, just a shade. Missing woman, he echoed, voice suddenly less theatrical. I watched him closely. This wasn't a man who looked guilty. It was a man who looked terrified. I don't know anything about that, he said, and this time it sounded true. I swear it. My pulse hammered. Then who does? I asked. Felix's eyes darted toward the back room door, a half-second glance, a habit, a fear. There are people, he said quietly, who bring me things. They don't talk, they don't haggle, they don't want receipts. What people? I pressed. Felix swallowed. Collectors, he lied automatically, then hesitated. Or people who work for collectors. I leaned closer, voice low. Felix, if someone is using your shop to move evidence from a crime, you're already involved whether you like it or not. His hands shook slightly as he reached under the counter, not for a weapon, for a ledger, old-fashioned, thick, full of handwritten transactions. I keep notes, he said, voice hoarse. Not names, not always, but descriptions, times. He opened it, flipping quickly, fingers trembling. Then he stopped, his eyes fixed on a page, and a sound escaped him that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. Oh no, he whispered. What? I demanded. He looked up at me with naked panic. That loop, he said. It shouldn't have been sold. Felix's ledger was a map of his sins. Dates, item descriptions, prices, vague initials that pretended to be anonymity. The loop entry was there. 3 days ago, received. 2 days ago, placed in case. Yesterday, sold to me. but beside the received line was a notation that hadn't been there for the other items. A small circle, then 2 words, hold, gray. Gray? I asked. Felix's eyes flicked toward the front window as if he expected the word to summon someone. He's not his real name, Felix said quickly. I don't know his real name. Describe him, I demanded. Felix swallowed. Tall, always in a gray coat, even when it's not cold. Soft voice. Polite, like he's asking for directions, not selling you a nightmare. My throat tightened. And he brought the loop? Felix nodded. He brought a box of things, said he'd found them clearing a property. I told him I'd need time to assess. He said, "You won't." The shop bell chimed softly behind me. Not the bell at the door, the one Felix had installed between the front and the back rooms, a warning system in case someone wandered where they shouldn't. Felix's eyes widened. "He's here," he mouthed. My heart kicked. I turned slowly, forcing my face into something neutral. A man stood in the doorway to the back room, half in shadow. Gray coat, dark hair, clean-shaven. Nothing remarkable, until you noticed how still he was, like he'd trained himself not to waste motion. He smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. "Felix," he said gently.
"You're looking pale." Felix's voice cracked. "I was just—" The man's gaze slid to me. Just a smile. "A customer." "Of course," he said, stepping forward. The shop lights caught his face, and it was the face of a man you'd forget in a crowd. That's what made him dangerous. His eyes flicked to the open ledger, then back to Felix. "I believe," he said softly, "that item was meant to stay here." Felix's lips trembled. "I didn't mean to." "You always mean to," the man replied, still gentle. "That's why I chose you." My pulse roared in my ears. Patel was outside, somewhere, but the man in gray had placed himself between me and the door like an accident. He took a step closer, and I smelled rain on his coat. Fresh, real, recent. "Did you enjoy it?" he asked me, nodding toward my coat pocket, where I knew the loop wasn't, because I'd left it at the lab. My stomach dropped. He knew. "You mean the loop?" I asked, buying time. He smiled again, the patient smile of someone explaining a simple concept. The loop, the story, the feeling of touching something that once mattered. "What do you want?" I asked. "Order," he said, as if it was obvious. "London is chaotic. I prefer lines, clear sequences, cause, effect, people who step where they shouldn't, get corrected." Felix made a small sound, and the man in gray didn't even look at him. His focus stayed on me. "You've taken an interest," he said.
That's dangerous, but also useful. My mind raced. If I ran, he'd stop me. If I screamed, no one outside would hear over the violin and the rain. If I stayed calm. "What is your name?" I asked. He tilted his head. "Names are for people who expect to be remembered." Then, very gently, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small object. Another loop, or what looked like one. He placed it on the counter beside Felix's trembling hands. "This one," he said, "is for you. A replacement and a reminder." I stared at it. It looked too clean,
too new, too eager. I don't want it, I said. His eyes hardened slightly, the first crack in his polite mask. You already have it, he said softly. You just don't know where. A chill spread through me like ink in water. Then his gaze flicked toward the window. Outside, across the street, I saw Patel move, subtle, shifting his stance, his hand near his jacket. The man in gray noticed too. He smiled. Ah, he said. The audience arrives. He stepped back, smooth as smoke. Felix, close the book. Be a good boy. Felix, trembling, shut the ledger. The man's eyes returned to mine. Walk away, he said, still gentle. This isn't your case. I forced myself to meet his gaze. Sophie Lambert, I said. Where is she? Something flickered in his eyes. Not guilt, not fear, annoyance. He leaned closer, voice a whisper meant only for me. You shouldn't say names out loud, he murmured. In London, names travel.
Then he turned, slipping back into the shadowed corridor as the front door opened and Patel stepped in with 2 officers behind him. But by the time Patel reached the counter, the man in gray was gone, and Felix Hargreaves was shaking so hard he could barely speak. Patel took the shop apart politely. Officers in plain clothes, hands in pockets, pretending to browse while their eyes cataloged exits, blind spots, hiding places. Felix sat on a stool behind the counter, like a man waiting for an execution that might arrive by post. I gave Patel everything. Felix's gray story, the ledger note, the second loop, placed like a threat. Patel examined the new loop with gloved hands. This is a decoy, he said immediately. Cheap, recent. He wanted you to take it so you'd stop looking for the other one. He asked if I enjoyed touching something that mattered, I said, voice tight. Patel's jaw clenched. Then he's enjoying this. A forensics team arrived, but we all knew the truth. The man in gray had planned for that. He didn't leave fingerprints. He didn't leave receipts. He left implications. Felix's ledger gave us one valuable thing, a pattern. Gray appeared in the margins of other entries, not often, but enough. Each time, an item marked hold, then moved quickly. No full names, but sometimes locations, a postcode scribble, a pub name, a station. Patel circled one entry with his pen. Paddington, he said quietly. My stomach twisted. Sophie's last sighting. Patel Nan. He's signaling. He wants us to follow. To what? I asked. Patel's eyes were tired. To a trap. Or to her. We went back to the lab. The original loop, my loop, sat in evidence storage now, sealed, silent. But its blood had already spoken. Forensic tech confirmed what Patel had hinted. The blood's chemical profile was fresh. The DNA match was strong. Sophie Lambert was either injured or worse. We pulled Sophie's file. She worked in compliance for a fintech firm in Canary Wharf. French, moved to London 5 years ago. No criminal history, no known enemies. But London doesn't require enemies to ruin you. It just requires opportunity. Patel stood over a map pinned to our board, tapping points. Baker Street, Paddington, Canary Wharf. Gray is moving like he knows the city, he said, not like a tourist, like someone who's worked cases. Ex-police, I murmured. Patel's gaze sharpened. That's what I'm thinking. We found CCTV near Hargreaves' shop. Grainy footage showed a tall figure in a gray coat entering at 1914, leaving at 1918, never looking at the camera. He moved like he knew where cameras were, like he'd trained others to avoid them. Can we ID him? I asked. Patel exhaled. Not from this, but we can bait him. He turned to me. You said he told you you already have the real loop. You just don't know where. What does that mean? I asked, but I already felt the answer crawling up my throat. Patel reached into a file and slid out a photograph. A parcel. Brown paper. String. No return address. It arrived at your office, he said. Addressed to you. 10 minutes after you left for Baker Street. My mouth went cold. We didn't open it, Patel said. Chain of custody. We waited for you. My hands trembled as I stared at the parcel photo. He knows where I work, I whispered. He knows more than that, Patel replied. We opened it together in the lab, gloved and careful, expecting a weapon, a note, a severed piece of theater. Inside was a single object wrapped in tissue, a small brass key. Attached to it was a luggage tag, white, scuffed, with a barcode. The handwritten name on the tag made my breath stop. Lambert, Sophie. Patel's voice was quiet. He's not just moving relics, he said. He's moving identities. And he wants us to find her, I whispered. Patel looked at the key again, then at me. Or he wants us to find the wrong thing, he said, and stop looking. Felix Hargreaves, under pressure, finally stopped performing. In the interview room, he looked smaller, stripped of shop lighting and violin music. The waistcoat didn't help him here, neither did charm. I didn't know about the blood, he insisted, voice hoarse. I'm a liar, not a murderer. Patel stayed patient. Tell us about the loop, he said. Not the story you sell, the truth. Felix swallowed, eyes glossy. It came in a box, he said, not with the other props. Gray brought it separately, like it mattered more. Did he say where it came from? Patel asked. Felix hesitated. He said it belonged to a detective who used to work a case near the river, he said. A real case, late 1800s. Something about a missing woman. My skin prickled. A missing woman, I repeated. Felix nodded miserably. He said it like a joke, like London's always had missing women. Patel leaned in. Did he name the detective? Felix shook his head. But he told me the engraving mattered, he whispered. CID 47. He said if I ever tried to verify it officially, I'd regret it. Patel's eyes flicked to me. CID 47, he murmured. Back in our archives, I dug through old CID inventory lists, the kind of paperwork that outlived governments. Most were incomplete. Many were handwritten in ink that had bled into the paper like secrets. I found it at 2:11 a.m. under a list titled Metropolitan Police, Criminal Investigation Department, Issued Instruments 1893, Item 47, Pocket Loop, Brass, Collapsible. Issued to Detect Inspector Arthur Baines. Arthur Baines. The name was a stone dropped into my stomach. I'd catalogued Bain's old file years ago, an unsolved case from 1894, known informally as the Mews Girl. A woman vanished from a Marylebone mews. Baines investigated. No body. No arrest. The file ended with a note in the margin. Evidence missing. Case closed by order. Evidence missing. I stared at the screen, feeling the past rearrange itself in my head. Patel came in, coat still on, hair slightly damp from rain. "You found something," he said. I showed him the record. Patel exhaled slowly. "So the loop is genuine," he said, "and Gray knows it." "Which means he knows our archives," I replied, "or he's been in them." Patel's gaze hardened. "If he chose this specific object," I murmured, "he wanted us to connect it to a missing woman." "And Sophie Lambert is missing," Patel said. My voice was barely a whisper. "So he's writing a pattern."
Canary Wharf looks like a city built by people who didn't want to touch the ground. Glass towers, clean lines, money disguised as architecture. Sophie Lambert's office was on the 14th floor of one of those buildings, where the air felt conditioned not just for temperature, but for emotion. Her supervisor met us with nervous politeness. "We've been cooperating," he said quickly. "Of course we have." Patel showed his badge. I showed nothing, because my role was quieter, but not less intrusive. Sophie's desk was neat, too neat, like someone who'd expect it to come back. A photo of her with a friend in Paris, a mug with a chipped handle, a stack of compliance reports that looked like they'd never done anything wrong and still felt guilty. Patel spoke to colleagues. I watched. People talk with their hands when they're lying. They touch their face. They adjust their sleeve. They smooth a tie that doesn't need smoothing. One man, a security consultant in an expensive coat, stood near the windows with arms crossed, watching us like we were the problem. When our eyes met, he smiled politely. It was the same kind of smile Felix had tried to sell me, but cleaner. Patel noticed my attention. "Who's that?" he murmured. "Sophie's firm security," Sophie's supervisor said. "We hired him after the theft incident last month." "What theft incident?" Patel asked sharply. The supervisor looked embarrassed. "A data breach. Someone accessed client identity files. Sophie was involved in the investigation."
My throat tightened. "Identity files," I repeated softly. Patel's eyes narrowed. "And security hired after," he said, staring at the consultant by the window. The consultant approached, hand extended. "Darren Hume," he said, "private security. I'm assisting the company." Patel didn't take his hand. D.I. Patel, Met. "You've got an interesting timing." Hume's smile remained. "London's full of coincidences," he said pleasantly. I watched his face. He was too calm, too polished, like he'd done crisis management as a sport. "What did Sophie find?" Patel asked. Hume shrugged slightly. "Sophie was thorough," he said. "She suspected internal involvement, but stress was affecting her." "Stress doesn't make you vanish," Patel replied. Hume's eyes flicked to me, just a flicker. Recognition, curiosity, warning. "My understanding," Hume continued, "is that Sophie had personal issues, a boyfriend, a disagreement. People disappear for ordinary reasons." Patel's jaw tightened. "We'll decide what's ordinary," he said. Hume smiled, stepping back. "Of course," he said, voice smooth. "If you need anything, I'm here." As he walked away, I noticed something in his coat pocket, a faint bulge, cylindrical, like a small tool, like a loop. My blood went cold.
That night, Patel and I sat in a small office with bad coffee and worse lighting, staring at the board we'd built. Baker Street, Paddington, Canary Wharf, Sophie's name on a luggage tag, Arthur Baines' loop, and now Darren Hume, security consultant with eyes like polished stones. Patel rubbed his temples. "We don't have enough," he said. "We have suspicion, pattern, and a man who smiles too much. We have an object with Sophie's blood on it, I said. Yes, Patel replied, and we need to prove how it got there. I stared at the loop photo again. If Hume is gray, I murmured, he's playing with us. Patel's gaze sharpened. Why send you a key with Sophie's luggage tag? He asked. Why place evidence directly into your hands? Because he wants a story, I said slowly, a narrative he controls. Patel leaned forward. Say it, he urged. He's staging, I whispered. He's staging crimes like historical cases, missing women, old tools, Baker Street mythos. He wants London to feel haunted by its own past. Patel's jaw tightened. Or he wants to hide something modern inside something old, he said, because people trust antiques. They don't question relics. My stomach twisted. So the loop is a smuggling container, I said. Not for drugs, for identity, for proof, for blackmail. Patel nodded slowly. Identity files were breached, he said. Sophie investigated. If she found something, she became a threat. And he used the loop, I said, because it links to an old missing woman case, which distracts us into thinking this is theatrical. Patel stood abruptly. We go back to Hume, he said. Carefully, I warned. Patel's eyes were hard. Carefully, he agreed. But we go. Paddington Station at night is a stomach full of metal. Trains breathe. Announcements echo. People move like they're being pulled. If you wanted to lose someone, you'd choose Paddington. If you wanted to be found, you'd choose it too, because cameras see everything, and still nothing makes sense. We pulled CCTV from the night Sophie vanished. Patel stood behind the analyst, arms crossed, watching frame by frame. Sophie appeared on camera at 1942, walking briskly. She checked her phone. She stopped near the luggage storage area, frowning, as if confused. Then she turned her head, like she'd heard someone say her name. A man approached her, gray coat, polite posture. He didn't grab her. He didn't shove her. He spoke to her, and she, God help her, followed. Patel's jaw flexed. She knew him, he muttered. The analyst zoomed. The man's face remained annoyingly average, but the coat was clear, gray. They walked toward the taxi rank. Camera angle shifted. For a moment, Sophie disappeared behind a column. When she reappeared, she was alone. Patel slammed his hand on the desk. Where did she go? He snapped. The analyst rewound, slowed further. In the frames behind the column, Sophie's arm lifted slightly, as if someone had taken her elbow. Then she stepped back out, alone, but her posture had changed, stiffer, like she was carrying something heavy. She was dragging a suitcase, not hers, a large black suitcase with a bright yellow strap. She moved it toward the luggage lockers, scanned something, and placed it inside. Then she walked away, fast, as if her legs were no longer hers. Patel's voice was low. He made her store something, he said. We pulled the locker records, the code used, the key ID. It matched the brass key Gray had sent me. Patel looked at me. He wanted us to open it, he said. We opened it with officers present, cameras recording, chain of custody tight. Inside the suitcase was nothing. Not nothing exactly. There was padding, foam tunouts, as if something valuable had been removed. And at the bottom, taped beneath the lining, was a single envelope. Inside the envelope, a photograph of Sophie Lambert, taken without her knowledge, and a printed document, a list of names, hundreds, identity records, and one more thing, a note, typed, "You like relics. Here is a modern one." Patel's eyes burned. He's taunting, he said. He's selling people, I whispered, and somewhere in London, a man in a gray coat was smiling politely because his story was unfolding exactly on time. The next lead came from Felix's ledger again, a location scribbled beside a gray entry from 2 weeks earlier. The violin, Marylebone. Patel frowned. Pub? He guessed. It's a private club, I said. Old money, old habits. They rent rooms upstairs. Antique nights, collectors. Patel's eyes narrowed. Then Gray is meeting buyers. We went the next evening. The violin looked like a place that had never allowed neon inside. Dark wood, low lighting, a doorman who judged you silently. London's old soul in a suit. We dressed the part, Patel in a clean coat, me in something understated but expensive looking. Felix had described Gray as polite. Polite men like this place. Inside, murmurs and glasses clinking. A corner room hosted a small gathering around a table. On it, objects laid out like offerings. A pocket watch, a letter opener, a police badge too old to be worn. People leaned in, voices low, eyes hungry. And there he was. Gray coat, average face, calm posture. Darren Hume. He spoke to a man in a tailored suit who looked bored by everything except control. The suited man examined an antique police notebook like it was a menu. Hume handed it over with a small smile. No one noticed the exchange as criminal. That was the genius. In London, wealth is allowed to touch anything. Patel's hand tightened on his glass. "We can't grab him here," he murmured. "Too many witnesses, he'll pretend they saw nothing." "We follow," I whispered. Hume left 10 minutes later, alone. Patel and I moved quietly, slipping out into the rain-wet street. Hume walked toward the Tube, Baker Street station. Of course, the city's irony never gets tired. We followed at a distance, down into the tiled tunnels, the smell of metal and electricity and damp stone. Hume descended the escalator without rushing, like he knew he was being followed and wanted to choose where the following ended. He turned into a service corridor, staff only. A door clicked open as if waiting for him. Patel swore under his breath. "He has access," he muttered. We pushed forward. The corridor was narrow, lit by fluorescent strips. We heard footsteps ahead, then silence. Patel raised his hand, signaling stop. Officers behind us moved cautiously. We reached the end of the corridor and found an empty maintenance room. On the floor, placed neatly like a gift, the original loop, brass, worn, engraved CID 47, and beside it, a small plastic vial. Inside the vial, a dark red smear. Patel's face tightened. "More blood," he said. My throat constricted. "Another message," I whispered. Patel lifted the vial with gloved hands. His voice was cold. "He's escalating," he said. And then, from somewhere deeper in the tunnels, we heard it. A soft whistle, not a tune, a pattern, 3 short notes, 1 long, as if London itself was signaling that the next act had begun. The vial's blood matched Sophie again, but this time the sample was fresher. Patel didn't sleep. I don't think I did either. London blurred between rain and fluorescent light, between tunnels and offices, between old files and modern dread. At dawn, Patel stood over Felix's ledger once more, eyes scanning. "Gray entries," he muttered. "Hold, move, hold, move." Then he stopped. A small note beside a recent entry, written in Felix's shaking hand. "Back room, upstairs." Patel looked up sharply. "Upstairs of the shop," he said. My stomach sank. "He's been using Felix's building," I whispered. We returned to Baker Street in daylight. The shop looked harmless again, sun reflecting off wet pavement, tourists strolling, London pretending. Inside, Felix looked like he hadn't moved since we left. His face was hollow. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I swear. He asked to rent the room upstairs months ago, said he needed storage, paid cash, always on time." Patel's voice was clipped. "You let a stranger rent a room above your shop." Felix's laugh was broken. "In London? That's half the economy." Patel signaled officers. They moved toward the back corridor. Felix fumbled for keys, hands shaking so hard he dropped them twice. The upstairs door creaked open. The room smelled of dust and cold air. It wasn't furnished like a living space. It was furnished like a set. On the floor, chalk outlines, like a crime scene diagram, but too neat, too deliberate. On the wall, pinned photographs. Sophie Lambert at Canary Wharf. Sophie at Paddington. Sophie walking down a street unaware. And next to the photos, Victorian clippings. The Muse Girl case. Arthur Baines. A missing woman from 1894. Gray had built a shrine to pattern. In the center of the room sat a chair, a light smear of blood on its armrest. Patel's jaw flexed. "She was here," he said quietly. Then, from the corner, a sound. A phone vibrating. Patel crossed quickly, lifted it with gloved hands. The screen lit. A video call. No caller ID. Patel answered. Hume's face filled the screen, calm as ever. "Detective," he said politely. "You're in my archive." Patel's voice was ice. "Where is Sophie?" Hume smiled faintly. "You're asking the wrong question," he said. "The right question is, who will you believe when you find her?" Patel's eyes narrowed. "What have you done?" Hume's tone remained gentle. "I've given London what it loves," he said. "A story, a relic, a villain, a chase." He tilted the phone slightly, and for a brief moment the camera showed a blurred figure in the background, slumped. A woman. Patel's breath caught. "Sophie," he snarled. Hume smiled wider. "You see," he murmured, "names travel." Then the call ended. Patel slammed the phone down, rage controlled by training. "Track it," he snapped to the tech. I stared at the chair, the blood, the shrine of old and new. Hume wasn't just hiding a crime. He was curating it. We found Sophie in an abandoned riverside warehouse near Limehouse, because London always keeps its ugliest truths by the water. The tracker pinged long enough for us to move, long enough for Hume to let us arrive. He'd left her alive, just barely. She was conscious when the paramedics loaded her into the ambulance, eyes glassy with shock and fury. She gripped Patel's sleeve with weak fingers. "He wanted me to sign," she rasped. "He wanted a confession." Patel leaned close. "Confession of what?" he asked. Sophie swallowed, voice trembling. "That I stole the identity files," she whispered. "That I sold them. He said he had blood, proof, relics. He said no one would question it if it looked historical." My chest tightened. "He tried to frame you using the myth," I whispered. Sophie's eyes flicked toward me. "He said London loves old crimes," she murmured. "He said people trust antiques more than people." Patel's face hardened. "Rest," he said gently. "We'll get him." But Hume was gone. By the time officers swept the warehouse, he'd vanished like smoke between train doors. No fingerprints, no trace. Just one final arrangement left on a crate near the entrance. Arthur Baines' loop, cleaned now, polished, the blood removed, as if he could erase the modern stain and return the object to its proper era. Beside it, a printed note. "Thank you for keeping records." Patel stared at it, jaw tight. "He's telling you he'll do it again," he said quietly. I picked up the loop with gloved hands, feeling the worn brass, the history beneath the manipulation. It wasn't just a tool.
It was a witness. And witnesses in London are always at risk of becoming props. Weeks later, Sophie recovered enough to give a full statement. The identity list led to arrests, buyers, intermediaries, people who thought they could purchase a life like a collectible. Felix Hargreaves lost his shop, his charm, and nearly his freedom. He'd been a liar, but not a killer. Hume, Gray, remained a shadow in our records. Patel filed his report with the kind of anger that doesn't shout, because shouting is wasted energy. He'll surface, Patel told me one evening, standing outside Baker Street Station, rain starting again like a familiar refrain. Men like that can't resist the stage. And if he does, I asked, what then? Patel looked at the flow of commuters, the indifferent faces, the city swallowing everyone equally. Then we'll be ready, he said, because now we know his obsession. What obsession? I asked. Patel's eyes were dark. Control, he said. He wants the past to obey him. I looked down at my gloved hands, at the loop sealed in an evidence bag, CID 47 still faintly visible. London had given it 100 years of silence. Hume had tried to turn it into a scream. But now it was back where it belonged, among records, among truth, among the things people thought they'd gotten away with.
And the rain kept falling on Baker Street, like the city was washing its hands. Only London never really gets clean. Not when the past still knows how to bleed.